The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the December wind of 1903 howled through the Montana pines, but inside, warmth and memory held sway. Caleb Stone sat in his rocking chair, 68 years weathered into every line of his face. His hair had gone silver, but his gray eyes still held the sharp alertness of a man who had survived but staying vigilant. Across from him, his grandson Benjamin leaned forward, 16 and hungry for stories. The boy's eyes reflected the firelight as he studied his grandfather's face. "Grandpa Caleb," Ben said, breaking the comfortable silence. "They say you once brought down a judge, that you killed him. Is it true?" Caleb drew slowly on his corncob pipe, the tobacco glowing orange. He let the question hang in the air, deciding how much truth a boy could handle. "Not killed, son," he said finally, his voice like gravel rolling over stone. "Brought to justice. There's a difference, though. It's a fine line sometimes." He paused, gazing into the flames. "But to understand that, you need to hear about the winter that changed everything. The winter of 1873. The winter I learned that justice doesn't always come from the law." Ben settled closer, recognizing the beginning of a story worth hearing. "It started," Caleb continued, his voice dropping into the cadence of memory, "with a woman nearly freezing to death in my barn." He closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice seemed younger, carrying 30 years of memory into the present moment. The storm came down from the mountains like the wrath of an angry god. December of 1873 brought a winter that Montana territory would remember for generations. The temperature dropped to 20 below zero, and the wind cut through wool and leather like they were paper. Visibility fell to arm's length as snow swirled in blinding white curtains across the frozen landscape. Through this maelstrom, a woman ran. Claire Montgomery stumbled through snowdrifts that reached her waist, each step requiring a force of will that most people never summon in their entire lives. Her thin boots had soaked through hours ago. Her fingers had gone from painful to numb to a distant, aching throb that she knew meant danger. The woolen shawl around her shoulders offered no protection against the savage cold. Behind her, torches bobbed like demonic fireflies in the swirling darkness. The mob had been 15 strong when they forced her from town. Their voices carried on the wind, distorted and terrible. "Witch, run her out! Harlot! Temptress!" Claire's lungs burned with each ragged breath. The cold air felt like knives scraping her chest. She had long passed the point where she could feel her face. She knew with the clarity that sometimes comes in extreme crisis that she was dying. The cold was winning. She stumbled on a hidden route and went down hard, face first into the white death. Her small burlap bag tumbled from her grip, spilling its contents. With hands that barely responded, she clawed desperately through the freezing powder. She had so little left in this world, but there was one thing she could not leave behind. "Please," she whispered into the howling wind. "Please, Lord." Her blue fingers closed around familiar leather. The Bible, Thomas's Bible, worn smooth by years of daily reading, filled with his careful handwriting. It was all she had left of her husband, and she clutched it to her chest with profound relief. But there was no time for tears. The torches were growing closer. She abandoned the rest of her scattered belongings and pushed forward into the white void, the Bible pressed against her heart. In her mind came the memory of Thomas on his deathbed 2 years ago. His kind face twisted with pain, his hand gripping hers with desperate strength. "Trust no one, Claire," he had whispered. "Trust no one." At the time, she had thought it was delirium. Now stumbling through a blizzard because an entire town had turned against her, she understood. Thomas had been trying to warn her. He had known something. Known that there were forces in Silver Ridge that would crush anyone who stood in their way. The cold was seducing her now, that dangerous warmth that meant the end. Her legs moved mechanically, no longer sure of direction. The storm had disoriented her completely. Behind her, the voices had faded. Either they had given up, or she had outpaced them. Or perhaps she was already dead. Her mind flickered like a candle in wind. Memories surfaced, disconnected. Thomas on their wedding day, his eyes crinkling with joy. The night he fell ill, his skin burning with fever, clutching her hand as life drained from him. Claire fell again, and this time she couldn't find the strength to rise. The snow felt almost warm. She knew what that meant. She lay there, the Bible clutched to her chest, and felt herself slipping away. Daniel, she whispered, using his middle name like she always had. I'm coming to you. Through the curtain of falling snow, a shape emerged. At first, Claire thought it was hallucination, her dying mind conjuring comfort. But as she blinked away ice crystals, she realized it was solid, real. A barn loomed out of the whiteness like a miracle. Hope surged through her frozen body, giving her one last burst of strength. On hands and knees, she crawled towards salvation. Each movement was agony. Her hands left streaks of blood on the snow where the cold had split her skin. But she kept moving because the alternative was death. When she reached the large wooden door, her fingers were too numb to grip the handle. She leaned her full weight against it, praying it would give. Mercifully, it swung open. The sudden absence of howling wind was shocking. Inside, the air still bit with cold, but it was bearable. The blessed relief of shelter. The smell of hay and horses filled her nostrils, and somewhere in the darkness, she heard the shuffling of hooves. Thank you, Lord, Claire whispered. She managed to pull herself deeper into the barn, into a stall filled with fresh hay. She burrowed into it, clutching Thomas's Bible to her chest. As consciousness began to slip away, she thought she heard footsteps approaching, the creak of the barn door opening again. But by then, darkness was claiming her. Caleb Stone had been checking his livestock when he first heard the barn door move. In a Montana blizzard, a loose door could mean dead animals by morning, and dead animals meant no income come spring. At 38, he knew the brutal mathematics of frontier survival. He grabbed his lantern and rifle and trudged through the snow from his cabin, cursing the storm. The wind fought him for every step, trying to tear the lantern from his grip. His face was wrapped in a wool scarf, but the cold still found ways to bite. The barn door was open, swinging in the wind. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd secured it himself 3 hours ago. His hand moved to the rifle, thumb on the hammer. Last winter, he'd given shelter to a traveler, only to wake and find the man gone along with Caleb's best horse. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Who's there? His voice echoed in the cavernous space. The horses nickered, but nothing else moved. He advanced cautiously, lantern high, rifle ready. Years as a deputy sheriff had taught him to clear a space methodically. Each stall received careful attention. Empty, empty, empty. When he reached the last stall, his lantern illuminated something that made him step back in surprise. Not a drifter or thief. A woman. She lay curled on her side, nearly buried in hay. Her dress was soaked through, darkened with melted snow. Her skin was frighteningly pale, almost blue. A book was clutched to her chest with fingers that had turned purple. For a moment, Caleb thought she was dead. Then he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest. He hesitated. A woman, alone, on his property. It would mean talk if anyone found out. The people of Silver Ridge already viewed him with suspicion since he'd abandoned his deputy position 3 years ago after Rachel died. They wouldn't understand. Then the woman made a small, pained sound. Something broke loose in Caleb's chest, like ice cracking on the spring river. The Lord placed her in my hands, he murmured. The words felt strange. It was the first time he'd invoked God in years, not since Rachel and their unborn daughter had been taken. But the words came anyway. He set the lantern down and knelt beside her. Her skin was ice cold. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse. It was there, but faint. 40 beats per minute, maybe less. She was moments from death. Caleb made his decision. He scooped her into his arms, shocked by how light she was. He retrieved his lantern and carried her through the blizzard toward his cabin. The wind fought him every step, but he knew the way by instinct. 30 paces from barn door to cabin porch. He'd walked it 10,000 times. Inside, he laid her before the hearth and built up the fire until it roared. He piled every blanket he owned on top of her, but as minutes passed, her skin remained gray. Her breathing seemed to grow more shallow. Caleb had seen this before. When the cold went deep enough, blankets alone wouldn't save a life. What was needed was the warmth of another body, skin to skin, the most primitive and effective method of treating severe hypothermia. The thought made him pause. It was improper, a man and woman, strangers, unclothed. If she survived, what would she think? But propriety wouldn't keep her alive. With practiced efficiency, Caleb removed her wet clothing, keeping his eyes averted to preserve what dignity he could. He noticed, despite his efforts, the simple gold band on her finger. A married woman, or more likely, a widow like himself. He changed into dry long underwear, then lay beside her under the blankets, pulling them tight. Her skin was so cold it burned against his. He held her close, willing his warmth into her frozen body. "Don't give up," he whispered. "Fight." As he lay there holding a stranger and listening to her shallow breathing, Caleb found himself doing something he hadn't done since Rachel died. He prayed. It wasn't elegant. The words came haltingly, rusty from disuse. "Lord," he whispered, "I know we haven't been on speaking terms. Not since you took Rachel and our baby girl. But this woman here, she doesn't deserve to die like this. So if you're still listening to angry men, I'm asking you to spare her life. Not for me, for her." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, something shifted. The woman gave a small shudder, then another. Her breathing deepened, became more regular. Caleb continued to hold her through the long night, dozing fitfully, alert to every change. By dawn, color had returned to her cheeks. Her body trembled with shivers, a good sign, though it meant pain as sensation returned to frozen limbs. When first light filtered through the windows, her eyes fluttered open. They were deep blue, the color of summer cornflowers. They held confusion and fear as they darted around the unfamiliar surroundings. She gasped when she realized where she was, in a strange cabin wearing a man's shirt. She tried to pull away but was too weak to move far. "Easy," Caleb said, his voice gentle but firm. He had already moved away at the first sign of her waking. "You're safe. I found you half frozen in my barn. I brought you inside." Her gaze darted around, then down at herself. Horror crossed her face. "Your dress was soaked through," Caleb said quickly. "I had to remove it to save your life. But I was as proper as circumstances allowed. I give you my word." He stood and moved to the far side of the cabin. "I'll turn my back while you wrap yourself in the blankets. Then we can talk." When he turned back, she had pulled the heavy quilt to her chin, her face flushed. "I'm Caleb Stone," he said. "This is my cattle ranch. You're about 5 miles outside of Silver Ridge." The woman hesitated before answering, weighing whether to trust him with even her name. "Claire Montgomery," she said finally. Her voice was hoarse. "Most people call me Claire." Something clicked in Caleb's memory. The name was familiar. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said carefully. "The seamstress from Silver Ridge?" Fear flashed across her face. "How do you know who I am?" "I know of you," Caleb said. "Your husband was Dr. Thomas Montgomery. He died 2 years ago, and I know what happened yesterday. Why they drove you out." Claire stared at him, speechless. "Your husband treated my wife Rachel before she died," Caleb continued, an undercurrent of old pain in his steady voice. "He was a good man, one of the few truly good men I've known." Tears welled in Claire's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "He was." Caleb took a deep breath. What he was about to say would change everything. "I also know," he said quietly, "that he didn't die of the epidemic like everyone believes." The color drained from Claire's face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your husband was murdered, Mrs. Montgomery. Poisoned. And I believe the same man who killed him was responsible for my Rachel's death as well." The statement hung in the air between them. The fire crackled. Claire felt the room spinning. She gripped the blankets tighter, trying to anchor herself. Memories surfaced. Thomas's growing agitation in the weeks before his death. His cryptic warnings. The strange symptoms. The way he had looked at her that last night and said, "Trust no one." "That's not possible," she whispered, though doubt crept into her voice. "I wish it weren't true," Caleb said, his voice heavy with grief. "But I've spent 3 years gathering evidence. Your husband suspected something was wrong with medicine that Judge Caldwell was providing to certain patients. Thomas was investigating when he suddenly fell ill." "Judge Caldwell?" The name hit Claire like a blow. The man whose wife had accused her, whose word had been enough to have her driven into a killing storm. "But why?" Claire asked. "Why would he want Thomas dead?" "Power," Caleb said simply, "and land." He moved to stoke the fire, giving Claire a moment to process. She watched him, this stranger who had saved her life and now claimed to know the truth about her husband's death. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the weathered look of a man who worked outdoors. Sandy brown hair flecked with gray. Several days of beard, but it was his eyes that held her, gray as winter sky filled with bottomless sorrow. You said the judge was responsible for your wife's death too, Claire said. How? Caleb's shoulders tensed. His voice grew tight. Rachel was pregnant, 8 months along. She developed complications, bleeding, severe pain. He paused, forcing himself to continue. Judge Caldwell gave her medicine, said it would ease her suffering. Instead, it killed her. Within hours, she was convulsing. The baby never had a chance. I'm so sorry, Claire whispered. Caleb nodded once sharply. Your husband was there that night. Thomas examined the tincture. I saw his face go pale. He told me later, quietly, that it contained hemlock. Poison. But by then it was too late. Rachel was dying and our daughter with her. He turned to face Claire fully, barely controlled rage burning beneath his calm. Thomas wanted to investigate. He suspected the judge was doing this to others. 2 weeks later, Thomas was dead. Fever, convulsions, heart failure. The exact same symptoms I'd seen Rachel suffer. And just like that, the only man who knew the truth was gone. Claire's hand moved unconsciously to the Bible. Caleb noticed. I dried it by the fire last night, he said, retrieving it from a shelf. Figured it must be important. Fresh tears spilled down Claire's cheeks as she clutched the Bible. Thank you. It's all I have left of him. Something softened in Caleb's expression. You're safe here for now. The storm's still raging, likely will for days. No one from town will brave it, and even if they did, they wouldn't come this far out. The wind howled against the cabin walls, confirming his words. Why are you helping me? Claire asked. You don't know me. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Because Thomas Montgomery once saved my life when I was laid up with pneumonia. Sat by my bedside for 2 days until the fever broke. I couldn't save his life when it mattered. The least I can do is help his widow. He pulled on his heavy coat. I need to check the animals. Try to rest. There's broth warming on the stove when you're ready. After he left, Claire lay back, overwhelmed. Her body ached from her ordeal, but it was her mind that reeled. Could it be true? Had Thomas really been murdered? She opened Thomas's Bible, her fingers finding familiar pages. That's when she noticed something she'd never paid attention to before. In the margins, in Thomas's neat handwriting, were notes. Not just biblical annotations, but medical observations. Dates, initials, symptoms. Her heart began to pound. There, beside Psalm 23, a note. R.S. Winter, 1870. Hemlock, cardiac arrest, source, J.C. R.S. Rachel Stone, J.C. Judge Caldwell. Thomas had documented it, written it down, hidden in plain sight in the pages of Scripture. Claire's hands shook as she continued reading. More entries, more initials, more deaths, each one carefully noted. And then, near the back, Thomas's handwriting became more urgent. J.C. prevented investigation, warned of consequences, must proceed carefully. If anything happens to me, Claire must know the truth. The entry was dated 3 days before Thomas died. When Caleb returned an hour later, he found Claire sitting up, the Bible open before her, tears streaming. He knew, she said, voice breaking. Thomas knew what the judge was doing. He documented it all, right here. He knew he was in danger, and he kept investigating. Caleb set down the firewood and moved closer, keeping respectful distance. May I see? Claire turned the Bible toward him. She watched his face as he read, saw the grim recognition. He was a brave man, Caleb said quietly. Braver than most. He knew the risk, but couldn't stand by. How many? Claire asked. How many people has the judge murdered? They spent the next hour going through the Bible together, decoding Thomas's notations. By the time they finished, they had identified 42 victims. 42 people who had died under suspicious circumstances, all after receiving medicine from Judge Caldwell. And all of them had owned property that the judge later acquired. He's been building an empire, Caleb said, voice hard. One death at a time, taking land from those too dead to resist, using his position to make sure no one questions it. Claire looked up at Ian. What do we do now? Caleb stood, moving to the window to look at the raging storm. For now, nothing. You need to recover. The storm needs to pass. Then we decide. He glanced at her. Unless you'd prefer to move on once the road's clear, I'd understand. The question hung between them. It would be the logical choice, the safe choice, but something held Claire back. Running would mean Thomas had died for nothing. I want to know the truth, she said, voice gaining strength. About Thomas, about your wife, about everything. I want to bring him to justice. Caleb studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we'll find it together. But you should know what you're agreeing to. The judge is powerful. He has the law on his side. This won't be easy, and it won't be safe. Nothing about the last day has been easy or safe, Claire replied. At least this way, there's purpose. A ghost of a smile touched Caleb's face. Your husband chose well when he married you. Claire, she said, if we're going to do this together, call me Claire. For the next 5 days, as the blizzard continued its assault, Claire and Caleb existed in a strange bubble of forced domesticity. He gave her his bed and slept on a pallet by the fire. During the days, he tended the animals while she recovered. They spoke little at first, each wary despite their shared purpose. But slowly, cautious trust began to form. Caleb taught Claire frontier survival, how to read weather by cloud patterns, the proper way to stack firewood, and one morning when the storm eased, how to shoot. Thumb here, he instructed, positioning her hands on the Winchester. Slide the action smooth. When you're ready to fire, don't jerk the trigger. Squeeze it gentle. Claire's first shot went wide, her second clipped the tin can, her third hit center, sending the can flying. You're a natural, Caleb said, genuine respect in his voice. They spent evenings by the fire, poring over Thomas's notes, piecing together the scope of the judge's crimes. The pattern became clearer. Judge Caldwell had systematically eliminated anyone who stood in his way, sometimes slow poison over weeks, sometimes quick, a single massive dose. If we could find his ledger, Claire said one night, we'd have proof, the kind even his influence couldn't suppress. Then we need to get into his house, Caleb said, into his study. That's breaking and entering. Is it worse than 42 murders? Claire asked. Because that's how many Thomas suspected. They sat in silence, the weight of that number settling over them. We'd need a plan, Caleb said finally. A good one. Then we make a better plan, Claire replied. On the fourth night, Caleb woke from a nightmare. Claire heard him tossing, muttering words she couldn't make out. Then clearly, desperately, no, Rachel, don't drink it. Claire moved quietly to his side and gently shook his shoulder. Caleb, she called softly, wake up. You're dreaming. His eyes flew open, wild for a moment. Then awareness returned. Claire, he gasped. I'm sorry. It's all right, she said. You were having a nightmare. He sat up, breathing hard, his hand trembling. It's always the same one. I'm with Rachel. She's in pain. The judge brings the medicine. I watch her drink it. Every time I try to stop her, but I can't move, can't speak. I just stand there and watch her die. Claire's heart ached. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? His voice was raw. I brought her that medicine. I trusted the judge. I was supposed to protect her. You didn't know. I should have. The self-recrimination was palpable. Thomas tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. Claire sat beside him. We can't change the past. After Thomas died, I went over every moment, wondering what I could have done differently. It didn't bring him back. It only made me more miserable. She paused. But we can honor them by finishing what they started, by making sure no one else suffers. That has to count for something. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. You're a remarkable woman, Claire Montgomery. I'm a woman who's had to be strong, she replied. There's a difference. They sat together in the firelight, neither speaking, but finding comfort in shared grief and shared purpose. On the fifth day, as the storm finally began to break, Caleb stood before a locked door at the end of the hallway. Claire watched as he stood there for a long moment, hand on the key but not turning it. Then he took a breath and pushed the door open. Inside was a room frozen in time, a lovingly crafted crib, a rocking chair, a half-finished baby blanket, knitting needles still thrust through the yarn. Rachel's room, Caleb said quietly. I haven't been in here since she died. Couldn't bring myself to change anything. Claire stood in the doorway, not wanting to intrude. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. He moved to a chest and pulled out a dress of deep blue wool and a warm shawl. You'll need these. When we go into town, you'll need to look like someone other than Claire Montgomery, the woman everyone thinks died in the storm. He turned, holding out the clothes. Rachel was taller. You'll need to adjust them, but she would have wanted them used. Claire took the garments, feeling their quality. Thank you. I'll take good care of them. As she turned to leave, Caleb spoke again. There's one more thing. He pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a derringer. Rachel's gun. I taught her to shoot. She never had to use it, but you might. Claire took the small pistol, feeling its weight. That evening, Caleb spread out paper and began to sketch. This is Silveridge, he said, drawing from memory. The judge's house is here. His study is ground floor, facing the back alley. How do you know? Claire asked. I've been watching for 3 years, Caleb said simply, waiting for a chance. And now you have one. Now we have one. He looked at her. Mrs. Caldwell goes to the milliner every Wednesday at 10, regular as clockwork. While she's there, the judge will be at the courthouse. The house will be empty except for the maid, and she's usually out at market. Claire studied the map. So I distract Mrs. Caldwell while you break into the study. That's the idea. Caleb's expression was grim. But Claire, if we're caught, the judge won't just run us out. He'll kill us. You need to understand that. I understand, Claire said steadily. I've already survived one death sentence. I'm not afraid of another. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Respect. But something warmer, too. He reached out and took her hand. We'll see this through, he said, together. Claire squeezed his hand in return, feeling the calluses of hard work, feeling his strength. Together, she agreed. That night, as Claire lay in bed, she found herself thinking not just about the dangerous mission ahead, but about the man across the room. A man wounded by grief but still capable of compassion. Still capable of fighting for justice even when it put him at risk. She thought about Thomas too, about how he would have liked Caleb, would have respected him. And somehow that thought didn't bring sharp pain. Instead, it brought peace, as if Thomas himself were giving his blessing. The storm had passed. Tomorrow they would ride into Silveridge. Tomorrow they would begin the dangerous work of bringing a murderer to justice. But tonight, in the warmth and safety of the cabin, Claire allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in 2 long years. Hope. Morning broke cold and clear over the Montana landscape, the kind of brutal clarity that comes after a major storm. The sky was sharp blue, almost painful to look at, and the sun reflected off endless expanses of snow with blinding intensity. Caleb stood on his porch, studying the weather with the practiced eye of a man who had learned to read the land's moods. Roads will be passable on horseback, he said, as Claire joined him, wrapped in Rachel's heavy shawl. We leave within the hour. Claire nodded, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The temperature had dropped during the night, and she estimated it was near 0, maybe colder. But the wind had died, and that made all the difference. In Montana winter, wind was the real killer. Inside, Caleb prepared their horses with methodical care. He showed Claire each step, knowing that frontier survival often depended on such details. Check the cinch twice, he said, demonstrating on his sorrel gelding. Horse breathes in when you first tighten it, holds air in his belly. Wait a minute, then tighten again. Otherwise, saddle slips mid-ride, and that can kill you in country like this. He packed their saddlebags with rope, ammunition, and supplies. From a locked cabinet, he retrieved his Colt revolver, checking the cylinder with practiced efficiency. Always leave one chamber empty under the hammer, he instructed. Safety measure. Revolver drops. That empty chamber saves you from shooting yourself. Claire watched, memorizing everything. She had adjusted Rachel's blue dress to fit her smaller frame, and with the wide-brimmed bonnet pulled low, she looked like a different woman entirely. The transformation was necessary. Claire Montgomery was supposed to be dead, frozen in the storm. Elizabeth Palmer, traveler from Boston, would take her place. Remember the story, Caleb said as they prepared to mount. You're a widow, heading to Oregon to join your brother's family. Passing through, need supplies. Keep it simple. And if I'm recognized, you won't be. People see what they expect to see. They expect Claire Montgomery to be dead. So Elizabeth Palmer is all they'll see. They rode out as the sun climbed higher. two figures on horseback cutting through the pristine snow. The trail to Silver Ridge took them through stands of ponderosa pine, their branches heavy with yesterday's snowfall. The horse's breath came in great plumes, and the only sounds were the crunch of hooves on packed snow and the occasional call of a raven overhead. As they rode, Caleb pointed out signs in the landscape. See those tracks? Elk came through during the night, heading down to the valley. And there, wolf prints crossing the creek. Pack of 5, maybe 6. Claire found herself fascinated by his knowledge, the way he read the wilderness like other men read newspapers. It was a different kind of education than Thomas had possessed, but no less valuable out here on the frontier. After this is over, she said, surprising herself with the question, what will you do? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes scanning the horizon. Haven't thought that far ahead, he admitted. Been focused on bringing the judge to justice for so long, I'm not sure what comes after. Maybe that's something worth thinking about, Claire suggested gently. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Maybe it is. They rode in companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts about futures that might or might not be possible, depending on what happened in the next few hours. As they approached Silver Ridge, Caleb guided them off the main road into a stand of trees. We'll leave the horses here, he said, dismounting. Less chance of them being recognized. He secured the animals, then checked his pocket watch. 9:15. Mrs. Caldwell should be at the milliner's by 10. That gives us time to get into position. They walked the last quarter mile into town, staying to back streets and alleys. Silver Ridge was a small frontier town, Main Street lined with wooden buildings that looked like they'd been thrown up in a hurry and expected to last forever. The courthouse dominated the eastern end, an imposing two-story structure that announced the reach of territorial law. At the opposite end stood the church, its white steeple pointing heavenward like an accusing finger. Judge Caldwell's house sat on the edge of town, exactly as Caleb had described. 2 stories, stone foundation, expensive by frontier standards. It spoke of money and power, of a man who had risen above his neighbors and wanted them to know it. Remember, Caleb said, his voice low, 30 minutes. You keep Mrs. Caldwell occupied. I get in and out. 2 gunshots means abort. Meet at the old church on Mill Street. Claire touched the derringer hidden in her dress pocket. And if you don't come, then you ride to Fort Benton like we discussed. Find Colonel Harris. Give him Thomas's Bible. We both come back, Claire said firmly, or neither of us does. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. He reached out and squeezed her hand briefly. Be careful, Claire. You too, cowboy. Claire walked toward Main Street, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every face she passed seemed to scrutinize her, though logic told her they saw only a stranger passing through. She touched the derringer hidden in her dress pocket, drawing small comfort from its weight. The memory of Mrs. Caldwell's face 3 days ago flashed through her mind, that expression of righteous fury as she accused Claire of seduction, of impropriety. The same woman she was about to sit beside and make pleasant conversation with, pretending to be someone else entirely. What if the disguise failed? What if something in her voice, her mannerisms, gave her away? Claire forced herself to breathe slowly. Caleb was depending on her. Thomas's memory was depending on her. 42 dead souls were depending on her. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted her bonnet one final time, and pushed open the milliner's door. They separated, Caleb melting into the alley behind the judge's house, while Claire made her way toward the milliner's shop on Main Street. The shop was small but prosperous looking, with lace curtains in the windows and a painted sign that read, Mrs. Collins, Fine Millinery. Claire took a steadying breath, adjusted her bonnet, and pushed open the door. A small bell announced her arrival. The shop smelled of fabric and lavender. Mrs. Collins looked up warmly while Mrs. Caldwell examined Claire with sharp curiosity. Passing through, are you? Mrs. Caldwell asked. 2 streets away, Caleb's blade slid between window frame and sash. The lock was simple, designed for privacy rather than security. He worked it carefully, aware that one mistake could doom them both. The window gave with barely a whisper. Yes, ma'am, Claire said, moving closer. I'm traveling to Oregon Territory. Caleb pulled himself through the window, landing silently on the study floor. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, shelves of law books. The desk dominated the center, its surface obsessively organized. He moved toward it. Oregon? My goodness, that's quite a journey. Mrs. Caldwell's voice carried that superior tone of a woman used to being important. Traveling alone? I'm a widow, ma'am. Claire let genuine emotion color her voice, thinking of Thomas. Lost my husband 2 years ago. Caleb picked the desk lock. Tension wrench. Pick. Feeling for pins. 1, 2. Click. The drawer slid open. Land deeds. Dozens of them, all in the judge's name. All from estate sales. Mrs. Caldwell's expression softened. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm Martha Caldwell. My husband is the judge here. Elizabeth Palmer. Pleased to make your acquaintance. Caleb's eyes moved to the locked medical cabinet. That was it. That had to be it. He crossed to it, pulled out his picks again. This lock was more complex. 3 pins. Mrs. Collins bustled forward with bonnets. Claire examined each with exaggerated care, asking questions, watching the clock from the corner of her eye. 10 minutes had passed. Caleb needed at least 20 more. The cabinet lock resisted. Caleb's hands were sweating despite the cold. Come on, 1 pin, 2 pins. The third one stuck. He adjusted his angle, applied gentle pressure. You said you came from Boston? Mrs. Caldwell asked. Oh yes, the theater, the museums. Claire forced enthusiasm into her voice while her mind screamed at her to hurry, to give Caleb more time. Though I confess, after 2 years, the crowds began to feel oppressive. Click, the cabinet opened. Caleb stared at rows of glass vials. Foxglove, hemlock, arsenic, each one labeled with a name, with a date, with a death. I can imagine, Mrs. Caldwell said. We have our own little society here. Caleb's hands shook as he grabbed the leather ledger from the bottom of the cabinet, opened it, read the first entry about Rachel. His Rachel, reduced to an accounting line. Tell me, Claire said, desperation making her bold, how does one manage such a large household out here? Mrs. Caldwell launched into domestic details. Claire nodded, smiled, asked follow-up questions, all while her heart raced. How much longer? Had Caleb found what they needed? Caleb stuffed vials and ledger into his coat. Time to go. That's when he heard the front door. Mrs. Brennan, I'm back from market. The maid. Too early. Caleb froze. In the milliner's shop, Claire saw the clock. 22 minutes. Was it enough? Footsteps in the hallway outside the study. Caleb's hand moved toward his revolver, then stopped. He couldn't shoot an innocent woman. The footsteps passed the door, continued toward the kitchen. Caleb grabbed the oil lamp from the desk, knocked it toward the curtains, controlling the fall. The flame caught. Smoke curled upward. He was out the window as the maid screamed. The fire bell began to ring, her earlier refinement abandoned in her panic. Claire stood rooted for a moment, then followed at a slower pace, joining the stream of curious townspeople heading toward the commotion. A crowd had gathered in front of the judge's house. Smoke poured from a ground floor window, but men were already hauling buckets from the town well. Claire hung back, searching the faces for Caleb. Just the curtains, from what I hear, a man near her said to his companion. Someone knocked over a lamp. Fire's mostly out already. Claire's knees went weak with relief. A small fire, a distraction. It had to be. She turned and walked calmly toward the edge of town, toward the old church where they had agreed to meet if something went wrong. Her heart hammered, but she kept her pace steady. Elizabeth Palmer had no reason to run. The church was a small structure, abandoned when the congregation had built a larger one at the other end of town. Its white paint was peeling and some of the windows were broken, but it still stood solid. Caleb was waiting inside, and the relief on his face when he saw her nearly made Claire's knees buckle. Thank God, he breathed. When I had to start the fire, I thought you might think. I knew it was you, Claire said. Did you find it? In answer, Caleb pulled out the ledger and the vials. Claire's hands trembled as she took the book and opened it, reading the neat entries. When she found Thomas's name, tears spilled down her cheeks. He documented his own murder, she whispered. Thomas. He wrote down what was happening to him. The entry was there in the judge's precise handwriting. T. Montgomery, arsenic, gradual administration, subject aware and investigating, threat neutralized. Threat neutralized, Claire repeated, her voice breaking. He reduced Thomas's life to those two words. Caleb's hand was gentle on her shoulder. We need to go. The judge will notice the break-in soon once the fire's out. He'll know someone was in his study. They left the church and made their way back to where they had hidden the horses. The town was still in an uproar about the fire, which worked in their favor. No one paid attention to two riders leaving town. They were a mile down the road when Claire spoke again. Where do we go now? The sheriff is appointed by the judge. The marshal is in his pocket. Who do we take this to? Fort Benton, Caleb said. There's a colonel there, Daniel Harris, Union cavalry veteran. I served under him briefly during my deputy days. He's an honest man, and he's outside the judge's influence. How far? 3 days hard ride in good weather. Caleb looked at the sky. Storm's cleared, but another one's coming. I can feel it. We've got maybe 2 days before it hits. They pushed the horses hard, stopping only briefly to rest the animals and snatch a few hours of sleep. Smoke rising from Caleb's cabin chimney stopped them both a quarter mile out. Caleb held up his hand, and they reined in their horses behind a stand of pine. We didn't leave a fire burning, Claire whispered. No, Caleb said grimly, we didn't. He studied the cabin for a long moment. 3 horses tied outside that didn't belong to him. Shadows moving behind the windows. His jaw tightened. Could be Running Eagle, Claire suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Could be. Caleb pulled his rifle from its scabbard. Or it could be Trouble. Either way, we don't have a choice. The evidence is in my saddlebag. They approached cautiously, Caleb in the lead, Claire behind with her hand on the derringer. As they neared the door, Caleb paused, listening. Voices inside. Male. Unfamiliar. He looked at Claire once, a long look that said everything words couldn't. Then he pushed open the door. Judge Harrison Caldwell sat in Caleb's chair by the fire, legs crossed, sipping from Caleb's whiskey bottle. 2 men flanked him. One was a scarred, hard-faced man in his 40s with a gun belt slung low. The other was younger, maybe 24, nervous energy radiating from him as his hand rested on his revolver. Good evening, Mr. Stone. Mrs. Montgomery. The judge's voice was calm, almost pleasant. Productive day in town? The scarred man's gun was already drawn, aimed at Caleb's chest. Don't even think about it, cowboy. Caleb's hand froze on his rifle. Slowly he lowered it, knowing he was outdrawn. Please, the judge gestured magnanimously. Sit. Let's be civilized about this. Civilized, Caleb said, his voice hard as iron. That's an interesting word coming from a man who's murdered 42 people. The judge smiled, unperturbed. You're wondering how I knew you'd come here. Simple. The fire in my study was too convenient. And you, Mrs. Montgomery, your accent was charming but unconvincing. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize Thomas Montgomery's widow? I've watched you sewing in that shop for 2 years. Claire felt ice run down her spine. He'd known all along, known who she was, what she represented, and he'd driven her out anyway, sentenced her to death in that blizzard. You're wondering why I let you live, the judge continued, as if reading her thoughts. Honestly, I thought the storm would finish what the mob started. When it didn't, when you disappeared, I assumed you'd frozen somewhere out in the wilderness. He took another sip of whiskey. Imagine my surprise when Elizabeth Palmer appeared in town, keeping my wife occupied while someone burgled my home. The judge stood, walking slowly around the small cabin. You think you're heroes, righteous crusaders for justice, but you're just obstacles. Inconvenient ones, but obstacles nonetheless. You're a murderer, Claire said, her voice shaking with rage. You killed my husband. You killed his wife and child. You've killed dozens of innocent people for their land. I'm a builder, the judge corrected, his voice hardening. This territory was chaos when I arrived. Squatters, drifters, no order. I brought structure. I brought law. I brought civilization. His eyes glittered. My father lost everything because weak men couldn't make hard decisions. I swore I would never be weak. Every property I acquired serves the greater good. The railroad is coming through here, and it needs consolidated land ownership. The greater good doesn't justify murder, Caleb said. Doesn't it? The judge turned to face him. How many men did you kill as a deputy, Stone? How many lives did you end in the name of the law? Men who were trying to kill others, men who'd committed crimes. And how is that different? You decided they deserved to die. I decided obstacles to progress needed to be removed. We're both executors of necessary violence. There's a difference between justice and murder, Caleb said quietly. The judge waved dismissively. Philosophy is tiresome. Here's what matters. You have something that belongs to me, my ledger, my property. You're going to return it. And if we don't? Claire asked. The judge's smile turned cold. Then you'll join the 42 names already in that ledger, along with some unfortunate members of the Crow tribe who, I'll report, attacked my men without provocation and harbored fugitives. He let that sink in. Yes, Mrs. Montgomery, I know about Running Eagle. You think I don't have eyes everywhere in this territory? He moved toward the door, nodding to his men. You have until dawn to decide. Two choices. Sign a confession admitting to your illicit affair and agree to leave Montana Territory forever. Or refuse and die in a tragic cabin fire. My men will ensure no evidence survives to contradict that story. The scarred man, Garrett, lit a torch from the fireplace, waving it near the dry wooden walls. One wrong move, and this whole place goes up, with you inside. The younger man, Pike, looked uncomfortable but said nothing, his hand still on his gun. Until dawn, the judge repeated, stepping out into the cold night air. Choose wisely. The door closed behind him. Through the window, Claire could see him mount his horse and ride away, leaving his two hired guns to watch them. Garrett settled into a chair by the door, rifle across his lap. Don't try anything stupid, he said. I sleep light, and I shoot faster. Pike took position by the window, avoiding eye contact with both of them. In the firelight, Claire could see he was younger than she'd thought. Barely more than a boy, really, trying to act tough. As the night settled in, Claire and Caleb sat at the table, seemingly defeated, while their minds raced for a way out. The Montana winter landscape stretched endlessly around them, beautiful and merciless in equal measure. On the evening of the first day, they made camp in a sheltered ravine. Caleb built a small fire, just large enough to warm them and heat some coffee, not large enough to be seen from a distance. As they sat in the flickering firelight, Claire found herself studying Caleb's profile. The strong jaw, the weathered face, the gray eyes that had seen too much loss. He'd saved her life, trusted her with his quest for justice, put himself at risk for a woman he barely knew. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. The truth, Caleb. Not just because Thomas saved your life once. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough. When Rachel died, something broke in me. I'd been a deputy, sworn to uphold the law, to protect people. And I couldn't protect the one person who mattered most. I couldn't even get justice for her death, because the man who killed her was the law in Silveridge. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. For 3 years, I've been half alive, going through the motions, working the ranch because that's what a man does, but not really living, not really caring about anything. He looked at her then, and the raw honesty in his eyes made her breath catch. And then I found you in my barn, more dead than alive, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt something. Fear that you'd die, relief when you survived, purpose when I learned who you were and what had happened to you. He paused. You made me remember what it feels like to care about something, to have a reason to fight. Claire felt tears prick her eyes. Caleb, I'm not saying this right, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. I'm not good with words. Never have been. What I'm trying to say is, you gave me back something I thought I'd lost. Hope, maybe, or just the will to keep going. Claire reached out and took his hand, and calloused from years of hard work. You gave me the same thing, she said softly. When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. I was just existing. And then everything with the judge and the ma, I should have died in that storm. But you saved me, and not just my life. You gave me purpose, justice for Thomas, a reason to be brave. They sat in silence, hands joined, watching the fire. Something was shifting between them, something neither of them had expected or planned for. They were two broken people, brought together by tragedy and a shared quest for justice, and somehow in that shared purpose, They were becoming whole again. Caleb broke the silence. After this is over, if we survive it, I'd like, I mean, I'd be honored if... He stopped, clearly struggling. Yes, Claire said simply. Whatever you're trying to ask, the answer is yes. He looked at her, surprise and something like wonder in his eyes. Then slowly, carefully, as if she might startle and run, he leaned in and kissed her. It was nothing like the kisses she'd shared with Thomas, those youthful, passionate embraces. This was something different. The kiss of two people who had both loved and lost, who understood pain and survival, who were choosing to risk their hearts one more time despite everything. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and it wasn't from the cold. We should get some rest, Caleb said, his voice rough. Long ride tomorrow. They banked the fire and settled down to sleep, wrapped in their bedrolls. But before she closed her eyes, Claire heard Caleb's voice in the darkness. Claire? Yes? I'm glad I found you in my barn that night. She smiled into the darkness. So am I, cowboy. So am I. The second day's ride was harder. The horses were tiring, and dark clouds were building on the western horizon, promising the storm Caleb had predicted. But they pushed on, knowing that the judge's men couldn't be far behind. Late in the afternoon, as they navigated a narrow mountain pass, Caleb suddenly held up his hand for silence. Claire reined in her horse, listening. There, behind them, the sound of hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving fast. How many? Claire whispered. Caleb's face was grim. 6, maybe more. They're pushing hard. Can we outrun them? He looked at their tired horses, then at the terrain ahead. Not likely. The pass narrows up ahead. If they catch us there, we're trapped. They urged their horses forward, but both of them knew it was only a matter of time. The pursuers were gaining, their mounts fresher, their numbers greater. Then Caleb saw it. A corniced ridge above the pass, snow overhanging the cliff face in a precarious overhang. Unstable, dangerous, and potentially their salvation. Stay close to me, he told Claire. When I say run, you run and don't look back. They moved carefully beneath the cornice, single file, leading their horses. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Then came a gunshot, the report echoing off the canyon walls. The cornice cracked. Run, Caleb shouted. They sprinted forward, pulling their terrified horses as the world behind them exploded in a roar of cascading snow. The avalanche started slowly, then built momentum, thousands of tons of snow and ice thundering down the mountainside. They reached a sheltered outcropping and pressed themselves against the rock face as the avalanche passed, a 50-foot wall of white death. The roar was deafening, primal, the mountain itself reshaping the land. When it finally stopped, an eerie silence descended. Caleb and Claire looked back at where the pass had been. It was completely blocked now, buried under 30 feet of snow. And somewhere in that white grave were at least 2 of their pursuers. Claire could see hands sticking up from the snow, grasping at nothing, already still. Did we? She couldn't finish the question. The mountain killed them, Caleb said, his voice hard. Not us, we just survived. There's a difference. But his face was pale, and Claire knew he was thinking the same thing she was. They had just killed men. Perhaps not directly, but the result was the same. 2 lives ended because of them. Come on, Caleb said. The others will find a way around, but we've bought ourselves time. We need to use it. The Crow Winter Camp was a collection of lodges arranged in a protective circle, smoke rising from fire holes in their peaked tops. Children played in the snow, while women tended fires and men worked on weapons and tools. It was a community surviving together, the way humans had for thousands of years before towns and judges and laws written on paper. Running Eagle led them to the central fire where the elders gathered. An old woman, her face mapped with wrinkles like the land itself, approached Claire. She said something in Crow that Claire didn't understand. She says, Thomas's spirit walks with you, Running Eagle translated. She can see him in the way you carry yourself. He is not at rest. Claire felt tears sting her eyes. Tell her I'm trying to give him peace, justice. The medicine woman nodded as if she'd understood the English. She took Claire's hands, examining the frostbite scars, then applied a pungent salve that immediately eased the lingering pain. Running Eagle brought them food, dried meat, and pemmican, and they ate gratefully. Around them, the Crow went about their business with quiet efficiency, a people who knew how to survive Montana winters. If you fail at Fort Benton, Running Eagle said quietly, the judge will use this as excuse to move against my people. He has wanted our treaty lands for years. We won't fail, Caleb said, though he wondered if he was making a promise he couldn't keep. They rode hard for another hour before the approaching darkness forced them to stop. Neither of them spoke much as they made camp. The weight of what had happened hung over them like a shroud. As full darkness fell and they sat by their small fire, Claire finally broke the silence. "Those men," she said, "do you think they had families?" "Probably," Caleb said quietly. "Most men do. Then we've made widows. Maybe orphans." "Yes," he looked at her across the fire. "And if we'd let them catch us, the judge would have made sure we disappeared. Your death would go unavenged. Thomas's murder would remain hidden. 42 deaths would mean nothing." He paused. "Sometimes there are no good choices, Claire. Only less bad ones." She nodded slowly, understanding but not comforted. They sat in heavy silence, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Claire spoke again. "Tell me about Rachel," she said softly. "Not how she died, how she lived." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring into the flames, he began. "She loved mornings, would get up before dawn just to watch the sun come up over the mountains. Said it reminded her that every day was a gift, a fresh start." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She sang while she worked. Off-key, terrible singing, but she didn't care. Said joy wasn't meant to be perfect." He paused, lost in memory. "When she told me about the baby, she cried. Happy tears. Said she'd always wanted to be a mother, to teach a child how to love the land the way she did. We were going to name her Emily, after Rachel's grandmother." Claire reached out and took his hand. "She sounds wonderful." She was. Caleb looked at Claire then, really looked at her. "You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, but in spirit. That strength that doesn't need to announce itself. That determination to do what's right even when it's hard." "Thomas was like that too," Claire said. "Quiet strength. He never raised his voice, never demanded respect. But people gave it to him anyway because they could see who he was. Sounds like they would have gotten along, our spouses." "I think they would have," Claire smiled sadly. "And I think they'd approve of what we're doing, of us helping each other find justice for them." "And after?" Caleb asked. "After the justice is done, if we survive it, what then?" Claire squeezed his hand. "Then we figure out how to live again. Really live, not just survive. Together maybe, if that's what we both want." "I'd like that," Caleb said quietly. "I'd like that very much. Tell me it gets easier. Tell me that someday I'll stop seeing those hands in the snow." "I won't lie to you," Caleb said. "It doesn't get easier. You don't forget. The best you can do is remember why you made the choices you did and hope that in the end, more good came from it than harm." They sat in silence after that, each wrestling with their own conscience until exhaustion finally claimed them. The third day dawned cold and clear. Fort Benton was visible in the distance by mid-morning, a welcome sight of civilization in the wilderness. But as they approached, they saw something that made Caleb curse under his breath. Horses, at least a dozen of them, tied up outside the fort's headquarters, and among them a distinctive black stallion that Caleb recognized immediately. "The judge is here," he said. "He beat us to Fort Benton." Claire felt her hope crumble. "Then it's over. He'll have already told his side of the story. We're the criminals. We broke into his house, started a fire, stole his property." "Maybe," Caleb said. "Or maybe Colonel Harris is the man I remember, and he'll at least hear us out." They had no choice. They couldn't turn back now. With grim determination, they rode into Fort Benton. The figure in the doorway was not the judge's men returning. It was Running Eagle, rifle raised, flanked by 2 Crow warriors. Their sudden appearance was like a miracle manifesting from the storm itself. "Drop your weapons," Running Eagle commanded, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned over 6 decades. "Now!" And Garrett spun, firing wildly at the door. The shot went wide, splintering wood. Running Eagle's return fire was precise. Garrett dropped, clutching his shoulder, his rifle clattering to the floor. Pike stood frozen, his gun half raised, caught between loyalty to his employer and the sudden appearance of armed men who clearly meant business. His young face was pale, torn. "Don't, son," Caleb said quietly. "You don't want this blood on your hands." For a long moment, Pike wavered. Then his gun clattered to the floor. His shoulders slumped as if a great weight had been lifted. Running Eagle's warriors moved swiftly, binding both men with practiced efficiency. The old Crow elder stepped fully into the cabin, his weathered face grave. "The spirit spoke to me," he said, meeting Caleb's eyes. "Told me you were in danger. I have learned to listen when the ancestors send warnings." Caleb gripped on Running Eagle's forearm in the traditional greeting. "Your timing is perfect, old friend, as always." "The white judge," Running Eagle said, his expression darkening. "He returned at dawn with 6 men. They attacked us as we prepared to move camp. We fought them off, but 2 of my warriors were wounded." Claire felt her blood run cold. "This is because of us, because you helped us." "No," Running Eagle's voice was firm. "This is because the judge has wanted our treaty lands for years. You gave him an excuse he would have found anyway. The difference is now we know his true nature. Now we fight back." He turned to Pike, studying the young man with sharp eyes that seemed to see into his soul. "You are young, misguided, but the spirits say your heart is not yet lost. You have a choice now. Help us bring justice to the man who corrupted you, or face the consequences alongside him." Pike swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I didn't know about the murders, I swear. The judge just hired me to protect him. Said some folks were trying to ruin his reputation with lies." "And now that you know they weren't lies?" Caleb asked. Pike looked at Garrett, wounded and glaring hatred at all of them. Then he looked at Caleb and Claire, at the evidence they'd risked everything to obtain. Finally, he looked at Running Eagle, at the dignity and strength in the old warrior's face. "My ma," Pike said quietly, "she would want me to do right. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. The judge is planning to bring the militia against your people. He's already sent riders to Fort Benton, claiming you attacked without provocation." Running Eagle nodded as if he'd expected this. "Then we must move quickly. How much time before the troops arrive?" 3 days, Pike said. "Maybe less if they push hard." "Then you must reach Fort Benton before the judge's lies take root," Running Eagle said to Caleb. "Colonel Harris is a fair man, but even he will hesitate to act against a territorial judge without compelling evidence." Caleb looked at the ledger and vials they'd risked so much to obtain. "We have evidence. More than compelling. The judge documented every murder in his own hand." "Evidence means nothing if you are dead before you can present it," Running Eagle said. He gestured to one of his warriors. "Swift Hawk will guide you through the mountain passes. The route is longer but hidden. The judge's men will not find you." Swift Hawk stepped forward, a young warrior of perhaps 25 with intelligent eyes in the lean build of a long-distance runner. He nodded respectfully to Caleb and Claire. "What about you?" Claire asked Running Eagle. "I will delay the judge's pursuit. My warriors and I know these mountains. We can harry his men, slow them, make them cautious." The old man's eyes glinted. "And perhaps teach them that Crow warriors are not to be trifled with." They gathered supplies quickly. Running Eagle's men provided fresh horses, winter gear made from buffalo hide, and provisions for the journey. As they prepared to leave, Caleb approached Pike, who sat bound but watchful. "You made the right choice today," Caleb said. "Your mother would be proud." Pike's eyes were wet. "Will you—" "There's a Bible at the church. Reverend Matthews has it. My ma's Bible. If I don't make it through this, will you make sure someone reads her letter?" "You'll read it yourself," Caleb said firmly. "You're coming with us. You're our witness." Running Eagle cut Pike's bonds. The young man rubbed his wrists, looking stunned. "You're trusting me?" "You've earned it," Caleb said. "Now earn it again. Help us bring the judge to justice." As dawn broke over the Montana landscape, 4 riders departed from Caleb's ranch. Caleb and Claire on their horses, Swift Hawk on a paint pony, and Pike on a borrowed mount. Behind them, Running Eagle stood with his remaining warriors, watching them go. "Brother," Running Eagle called to Caleb, "the path you walk is dangerous, but you do not walk it alone. The ancestors walk with you. Caleb raised his hand in farewell, then turned his horse toward the mountains. They had 2 days, maybe 3, to reach Fort Benton before the judge's lies became accepted truth. 2 days to prevent a massacre of innocent people. 2 days to bring a murderer to justice. The ride was brutal. Swift Hawk led them through paths that seemed impossible. Narrow trails along cliff faces where one wrong step would mean a plunge to certain death. They rode through the day and into the night, stopping only when the horses were near collapse. On the first night, they made camp in a cave that Swift Hawk knew, sheltered from the wind and hidden from any pursuit. As they huddled around a small fire, Pike spoke hesitantly. "I need you to understand something. When the judge hired me, I was desperate. My sister, she's sick, needs medicine we can't afford. The judge offered good money, said it was just protection work." He stared into the flames. "I knew it wasn't entirely legal, but I told myself it wasn't really wrong either, that I was just doing a job." "How did you end up working for him?" Claire asked. "My father was a drunk and a thief, got himself killed trying to rob a stage, left me and my sister with nothing but debts and a bad name. The judge, he said he didn't hold a man's father against him. Said he believed in second chances." Pike laughed bitterly. "Turns out he just believed in using desperate people." Caleb poked at the fire. "The judge is good at finding people's weaknesses and exploiting them. He did the same thing to dozens of people in Silver Ridge, found their vulnerabilities and used them." "Like my husband," Claire said quietly, "Thomas was investigating the epidemic. The judge offered to help, provided medicines. Thomas trusted him because he was a judge, a man of the law. That trust killed him." Swift Hawk, who had been silent until now, spoke in careful English. "The white man's law is strange. Among my people, a man who betrays trust is exiled or killed. There is no question. But in your world, the man who wears the symbol of law can break it with impunity." "Not always," Caleb said. "Sometimes justice finds a way. That's what we're fighting for now." They slept in shifts, always one person on watch. Claire found herself unable to sleep during her rest period, her mind racing with thoughts of what awaited them at Fort Benton. What if Colonel Harris didn't believe them? What if the judge's influence extended even there? Caleb must have sensed her restlessness. He came and sat beside her, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the others. "Can't sleep either," he said. "Too much to think about," Claire admitted. "Too much riding on what happens when we reach the fort." "We'll make Harris believe us," Caleb said with more confidence than he felt. "The evidence is solid. Pike's testimony corroborates it, and Harris is an honorable man. And if he's not, if the judge has gotten to him?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Then we find another way. We don't give up, Claire. We've come too far and risked too much." She looked at him in the firelight, this man who had become so much more than a rescuer. "When did you decide that this was worth dying for?" "The moment I found you in my barn," Caleb said simply. "I'd been half dead for 3 years just going through the motions. But saving you, fighting beside you, it woke something up in me. Made me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond just surviving." Claire reached out and took his hand. "I feel the same way. Thomas wouldn't want me to stop living because he died. He'd want me to fight, to love again, to find purpose." "Do you think they'd approve?" Caleb asked. "Rachel and Thomas, of us?" "I think," Claire said softly, "that they brought us together. I think they're watching over us and hoping we survive this." Caleb squeezed her hand. "Then we'll survive it. For them. And for us." The second day brought new challenges. A late winter storm rolled in, not as fierce as the blizzard that had first brought Claire to Caleb's barn, but dangerous nonetheless. Visibility dropped and the trails became treacherous with ice. They were navigating a narrow ridge when disaster struck. Claire's horse stepped on a patch of ice, its legs sliding out from under it. The animal screamed, trying to recover its balance, but the weight distribution was wrong. Horse and rider began to slide toward the edge. Caleb reacted instantly. He drove his horse forward, grabbing Claire's arm and pulling her from the saddle just as her mount went over the edge. The horse's terrified scream echoed off the canyon walls, then cut off abruptly. Claire clung to Caleb, shaking, as they both balanced precariously on his horse. Swift Hawk reached them seconds later, grabbing the bridle and leading them to more stable ground. "Are you hurt?" Caleb asked, his voice tight with concern. Claire shook her head, unable to speak. The closeness of death had stolen her words. She had been seconds, inches, from following that horse into the abyss. "You'll ride with me," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. He helped her settle in front of him, his arms around her as he held the reins. She could feel his heart hammering against her back, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. They rode on, more cautiously now, acutely aware of how fragile their lives were in this unforgiving landscape. That evening they made camp in another sheltered spot. Swift Hawk and Pike tended to the horses while Caleb helped Claire, who was still shaken from the near-death experience. "I keep thinking," she said as they sat by the fire, "about how close it was. Another second and I would have gone over that cliff, gone to join Thomas." "But you didn't," Caleb said firmly. "You're here, you're alive. And tomorrow we reach Fort Benton and finish what we started." What if it's not enough? What if all of this, all the death and danger, what if it doesn't matter in the end? Caleb turned her face toward him gently. "It matters because we made it matter. Because we refused to let evil go unopposed. That has to count for something." He kissed her then, a desperate kiss that spoke of fear and relief and the fierce determination to survive. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "After this is over," Caleb said, "if we live through it, I want to build a life with you, a real life, not one haunted by ghosts and vengeance, but one filled with purpose and maybe even happiness." "I want that too," Claire whispered, "more than anything." The third day dawned clear and bitterly cold. Fort Benton was visible by mid-morning, a welcome sight of civilization. But as they approached, Caleb's expression darkened. "Look there," he said, pointing to a collection of horses tied outside the fort's headquarters. Among them was a distinctive black stallion with white stockings. "The judge," Claire breathed. "He beat us here," Pike said, his face pale. "He must have ridden through the night." Swifthawk studied the fort with sharp eyes. "The white chief may have already heard the judge's lies. This will be difficult." They had no choice but to continue. Turning back now would mean abandoning everything they'd fought for. With grim determination, they rode through the fort's gates. Fort Benton was a busy place, a frontier military outpost that also served as a major trading hub. Soldiers drilled in the parade ground while merchants haggled over goods. It was a place where territorial law and military authority intersected, and right now both were inside that headquarters building. They dismounted and approached the building. A young lieutenant stopped them at the door. "State your business," he said officiously. "We're here to see Colonel Harris," Caleb said. "It's urgent. The colonel is in a meeting with Judge Caldwell and cannot be disturbed." "I'm well aware of who he's meeting with," Caleb said, his voice hard. "That's precisely why we need to see him. We have evidence of crimes committed by the judge." The lieutenant looked skeptical. "Crimes against a territorial judge? Sir, I think you should—" "Lieutenant," a new voice cut through the conversation. A man in his 50s, wearing a colonel's insignia, stood in the doorway. He was gray-bearded with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Let them through." "But sir, Judge Caldwell said—" "I don't care what Judge Caldwell said. These people have traveled a long way in dangerous weather. The least we can do is hear what they have to say." Colonel Daniel Harris stepped aside. "Come in, all of you." They entered to find Judge Caldwell seated comfortably in a leather chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up at their entrance, and his face went through a remarkable transformation. Surprise, then rage, then a carefully constructed mask of concerned authority. "Colonel Harris," the judge said smoothly, "these are the fugitives I was telling you about. The ones who broke into my home, assaulted my men, and incited the Crow to violence." "Are they now?" Harris said mildly. He moved behind his desk, studying each of them in turn. His gaze lingered on Caleb. "Stone? Caleb Stone. I thought that was you. It's been years." "5 years, sir," Caleb said, "since I resigned as deputy." "I remember, after your wife died." Harris's expression softened briefly. "I'm sorry for your loss. She was a good woman." He looked at the others. "And you would be?" "Claire Montgomery," Claire said, stepping forward with more courage than she felt. "My husband was Dr. Thomas Montgomery of Silver Ridge. He was murdered 2 years ago by Judge Caldwell." The judge laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. Colonel, surely you don't believe this wild accusation? This woman is clearly delusional. Her husband died in an epidemic, along with many others. And this young man? Harris asked, nodding to Pike. Jacob Pike, sir. I was employed by the judge as a guard. I'm here to testify about what I witnessed. Testify? The judge's face darkened. This boy is a known criminal. His testimony is worthless. Then you won't mind if I hear it anyway, Harris said. His tone was still mild, but there was steel underneath. And you, warrior? I don't believe we've met. Swifthawk stood straight, meeting the colonel's eyes. I am Swifthawk of the Crow. I guide these people through the mountains to escape the judge's hunters. Running Eagle sends his greetings and says to tell you the truth has many voices. Harris's eyebrows rose. Running Eagle, I know that name. Good man. Helped us track horse thieves 2 years back. He sat down behind his desk. All right, I'm listening. But this better be good because you're making some serious accusations against a sitting judge. Caleb stepped forward and placed the leather ledger on Harris's desk. This is Judge Caldwell's private record of 42 murders committed over 8 years. Each victim owned property that the judge acquired after their deaths. The judge lunged forward. That's my private property, stolen from my home. You can't. Sit down, Caldwell, Harris said sharply, or I'll have you removed while I review this evidence. The judge sat, but his face was flushed with rage. Harris opened the ledger and began to read. The room fell silent except for the turning of pages. Claire watched the colonel's face, seeing his expression grow grimmer with each entry he read. These names, Harris said finally, I recognize some of them. Robert Harrison, Mary Chen, James Whitmore, these were prominent citizens. All dead under suspicious circumstances, Caleb said. All after receiving medicine or treatment from Judge Caldwell, and all leaving property that the judge subsequently acquired. Harris turned to another page. Rachel Stone, December 1870. This was your wife, Stone? Yes, sir. She was eight months pregnant. The judge gave her medicine, said it would ease her pain. Instead, it killed her and our unborn daughter. The judge's face was no longer flushed. It had gone pale. This is a forgery. Anyone could have written this. It proves nothing. It's in your handwriting, Claire said, and we have more. She pulled out the vials Caleb had taken from the medical cabinet. These were in your study, each one labeled with a victim's name. Harris examined the vials, his expression unreadable. These could be legitimate medical supplies. Look at the labels, sir, Caleb urged. Each one has a name and a date, dates that correspond to the deaths recorded in the ledger. The colonel studied one vial closely. Thomas Montgomery, February 1871. He looked at Claire. Your husband? Yes, sir. He was investigating the epidemic deaths. He suspected they weren't natural. 3 days after he began his investigation, he fell ill. The symptoms matched arsenic poisoning, not influenza. This is preposterous. The judge was on his feet now. Colonel, I demand you arrest these criminals. They've broken into my home, stolen my property, assaulted my employees. Your employees? Harris interrupted. You mean Garrett Woods and Jacob Pike? He turned to Pike. Tell me what you witnessed, son. Pike took a deep breath and began to speak. He described being hired by the judge to intimidate witnesses and silence questions. He told of the night at Caleb's cabin when the judge had given them an ultimatum, sign a false confession or die. He spoke of watching the judge order his men to pursue Caleb and Claire, to kill them if necessary. These are lies, the judge shouted. This boy is a criminal. I never. Then explain this, Harris said, pulling out another document from the ledger. This appears to be a list of properties you've acquired, 42 of them, all from estate sales or auctions following the deaths of their original owners. That's quite a coincidence, wouldn't you say? The judge's mask was cracking. I'm a businessman. I invest in property. There's nothing illegal about that. There is when you murder the owners to acquire their land, Caleb said quietly. Harris stood, his decision made. Judge Harrison Caldwell, based on the evidence presented, I'm placing you under military arrest pending a formal investigation. Lieutenant? The young lieutenant who had tried to stop them earlier entered. Sir, place Judge Caldwell in custody. He's to be held in the stockade until we can convene a proper tribunal. This is outrageous. The judge's composure shattered completely. You can't do this. I'm a territorial judge. I have the governor's ear. I've built this territory into something civilized. You've built a graveyard, Harris said coldly, and lined your pockets with blood money. Take him away. As the lieutenant led the protesting judge from the room, Harris turned to Caleb and Claire. This is going to cause political upheaval. The judge has powerful friends, but the evidence is compelling. More than compelling, it's damning. What happens now? Claire asked. Might we convene a military tribunal? Given the judge's position, this will need to be handled carefully. I'll send for the territorial attorney general and representatives from Washington. This needs to be done by the book. He paused. But I want you to know I believe you, all of you, and I'll do everything in my power to see that justice is done. Relief washed over Claire so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. Caleb's hand on her arm steadied her. Thank you, Colonel, Caleb said. Don't thank me yet. The fight's not over. The judge will have lawyers, influential friends. They'll try to discredit this evidence, discredit you. Harris looked at Pike. And you, young man, you'll need to testify formally. Are you prepared for that? Pike nodded. Yes, sir. It's time I did the right thing. For my ma, if nothing else. Harris smiled slightly. Good man. Lieutenant Morrison will find you all quarters. Get some rest. Tomorrow we begin building the case that will bring Judge Caldwell to justice. As they left the headquarters building, stepping out into the cold Montana air, Claire felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of Thomas's unavenged death, the burden of injustice, had finally been lifted. Caleb's arm around her shoulders felt right, felt like home. We did it, she whispered. Not yet, he said. But we're close. So close. The tribunal convened 3 days later. Word had spread quickly through the territory about the arrest of Judge Caldwell, and the fort was packed with spectators. Some came to support the judge, others to see if the accusations were true. Many came simply because it was the most dramatic event in Montana territory in years. The proceedings were held in the fort's assembly hall, with Colonel Harris presiding alongside 2 other military officers and a civilian judge sent from the territorial capital. The judge's defense team consisted of 3 lawyers, all expensive, all determined to destroy the case against their client. Claire sat in the front row with Caleb, watching as the evidence was presented. First came the ledger, entered into evidence despite the defense's objections that it was obtained illegally. Then the vials of poison, each one examined and tested to confirm their deadly contents. Thomas's Bible was presented, with Claire explaining the coded notations in the margins. The defense tried to claim these were simply medical observations, not evidence of murder, but the dates and symptoms matched too perfectly with the ledger's entries. Pike testified, his voice steady despite the judge's lawyer's attempts to rattle him. He described the night at Caleb's cabin, the judge's ultimatum, the chase through the mountains. Under oath, he confirmed everything Caleb and Claire had claimed. Then it was Caleb's turn. He told the story of Rachel's death, his voice breaking only once as he described watching her and their unborn child slip away. He spoke of his 3 years of investigation, of the pattern he'd discovered, of the evidence he'd painstakingly gathered. Claire testified last. She spoke of Thomas's dedication to his patients, his suspicion that something was wrong, his investigation into the epidemic deaths. She read from his Bible, from his final entries documenting his own poisoning, his knowledge that the judge was killing him even as he grew too weak to stop it. My husband died knowing the truth, she said, looking directly at Judge Caldwell. He died knowing that the man sworn to uphold justice was a murderer, and his last words to me were trust no one. He was trying to warn me, trying to protect me from the same fate. The defense's case was simple. The evidence was circumstantial, obtained illegally, and brought by biased witnesses with grudges against a prominent citizen. The judge himself took the stand, portraying himself as a victim of jealousy and conspiracy. I've dedicated my life to bringing order to this territory, he said, his voice ringing with false sincerity. I've made difficult decisions, yes. I've profited from my investments, certainly. But murder? Never. These accusations are the result of grief-stricken people looking for someone to blame for their losses. But then came the surprise witness. Martha Caldwell, the judge's wife, entered the courtroom. The spectators erupted in whispers. The judge's face went white. Martha approached the stand with quiet dignity. In her hands, she carried a small leather journal. "I've known for 12 years," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I watched my husband poison our neighbor, John Harrison, and said nothing. I've been complicit through my silence, but I cannot remain silent any longer." She opened the journal. "This is Harrison's private diary, kept in our bedroom safe. I've known the combination for 20 years. He thought I didn't, but I did. In here, he documents his crimes, his real thoughts, unfiltered by the need to maintain his public image." The courtroom was utterly silent as Martha read entries that confirmed everything the prosecution had claimed. The judge's twisted ideology, his belief that eliminating obstacles to progress was not only justified but necessary. His pride in building an empire, his contempt for those too weak or stupid to resist him. "Why come forward now?" one of the defense lawyers demanded during cross-examination. Martha looked at her husband, and for a moment, something like sorrow crossed her face. "Because I finally realized that protecting him was destroying my own soul. Because I've enabled evil for too long. And because these people," she gestured to Caleb and Claire, "had the courage to risk everything for truth, I could do no less." The tribunal deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. "Harrison Caldwell," Colonel Harris read, "you have been found guilty of 42 counts of murder, conspiracy, abuse of office, and crimes against the United States territories. The sentence is death by hanging." The judge's composure finally shattered completely. He lunged across the room toward Martha, screaming obscenities, calling her a traitor and a whore. Guards restrained him, dragging him from the courtroom as he ranted about building civilization, about weak people who didn't understand that progress required sacrifice. Claire felt tears streaming down her face. Justice. Finally, after 2 years of grief and 6 days of terror, there was justice for Thomas. Caleb's arm around her was the only thing keeping her upright. 2 weeks later, on a cold but clear Montana morning, Judge Harrison Caldwell was hanged in Fort Benton's public square. Claire chose not to attend. She had no desire to watch a man die, even one who had caused so much suffering. Instead, she and Caleb spent that morning at a small chapel, saying prayers for all the victims whose names were recorded in that terrible ledger. Pike attended the execution. He said later that the judge showed no remorse, blamed everyone but himself to the very end. "He died as he lived," Pike said, believing he was right and the world was wrong. The territorial government moved swiftly to compensate the victims' families. Properties were returned, estates settled properly. Martha Caldwell donated her husband's fortune to establish a fund for widows and orphans, then left Montana Territory to live with her sister back east. Running Eagle and his people received formal recognition from the territorial governor, along with expanded treaty protections for their lands. The governor personally apologized for nearly deploying troops based on the judge's lies. Pike found his redemption. With the reward money from testifying against the judge, he was able to afford proper medicine for his sister. Colonel Harris offered him a position as a civilian scout for the fort, a chance to build an honest life. Pike accepted, saying he owed it to his mother's memory to become the man she'd wanted him to be. 6 months after the trial, on a warm summer day that seemed to belong to a different world than the brutal winter they'd survived, Caleb and Claire were married. The ceremony took place at Caleb's ranch, in the small chapel he'd built for Rachel years before. It had taken him months to feel ready to open those doors again, to allow life and hope back into a space that had been sealed with grief. Running Eagle officiated, blending Christian ritual with Crow traditions in a ceremony that honored both the past and the future. The small gathering included Pike, now clean-shaven and confident in his new life, Swifthawk, and several Crow families, Colonel Harris, who'd become a friend, a few folks from Silver Ridge who'd never believed the lies about Claire. Claire wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, her first creation in months. After everything that had happened, returning to her craft had felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that the judge had tried to destroy. As she walked toward Caleb, standing tall in his best clothes and looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him, Claire felt the presence of those who couldn't be there. Thomas and Rachel, watching from whatever place the dead reside, blessing this union of two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other. The vows they spoke were simple but profound. "I thought my life ended when Rachel died," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "You showed me it was just waiting to begin again. I promise to honor your strength, to stand beside you in all things, and to build a life worthy of the second chance we've been given." Claire's voice was steady despite her tears. Thomas believed in healing, in making things whole again. "You've healed me, Caleb Stone, in ways I didn't know I needed. I promise to be your partner, your comfort, and your strength, as you've been mine. Together, we'll honor those we've lost by living fully." When Running Eagle pronounced them husband and wife, the gathering erupted in cheers. But for Caleb and Claire, the only sound that mattered was each other's heartbeat, steady and strong and full of promise. The reception was simple but joyful. Pike played a surprisingly good fiddle, and there was dancing and laughter. As the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Claire found herself standing apart, looking at the small graves where Rachel and Emily rested. Caleb joined her, taking her hand. "Do you think they mind?" she asked. "Us being happy?" "I think," Caleb said, "that they brought us together. I think they're finally at peace knowing that their deaths meant something. That justice was done, that life goes on." From the chapel, Running Eagle approached. "The ceremony reminded me of something my grandfather used to say. Justice is mercy's other face. Both lead to peace." Claire smiled through her tears. Thomas would have liked that. "Both your spirits, they rest now," Running Eagle said. "Their debts be paid, their memories honored. You are free to live." As darkness fell and the stars emerged, brilliant and infinite against the Montana sky, the gathering moved inside to continue the celebration. But Caleb and Claire lingered a moment longer, looking up at those stars that Rachel had loved. "Ready?" Caleb asked. Claire squeezed his hand. "Ready." Together they walked back toward the light and warmth and laughter, toward their future, toward life. The long winter had finally ended. Spring had come at last, and in the vastness of the Montana night, if you listened carefully, you might have heard the whisper of two souls, finally at rest, blessing the living who had fought so hard to honor the dead. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers. Caleb Stone, 68 years old now, sat in silence, the weight of memory settling over the cabin like the Montana snow outside. Benjamin sat motionless, his young face illuminated by the dying firelight. When he finally spoke, his voice was hushed with awe. "So, Grandma Claire, you saved each other." Caleb nodded slowly, his gnarled hand resting on the arm of his rocking chair. "We did, son, and ourselves. That's what love does when it's real. Gives you something worth fighting for, worth living for." "And the judge? Justice won in the end?" "Eventually," Caleb's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "But justice isn't always fast, Ben. Sometimes you have to fight for it. Sometimes you have to risk everything. But you never stop fighting, not when it matters." Ben leaned forward. "Grandpa, I want to be like you. Brave like that." Something softened in Caleb's weathered face. "Then be better than me, son. Learn from my mistakes. I waited 3 years to act. 3 years of anger and grief before I found the courage to fight." He reached out, placing his hand on Ben's shoulder. "Stand for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's what your grandmother taught me." "Is she—" Ben hesitated. "Is Grandma Claire all right? She's been sleeping more lately." Caleb's eyes grew distant. "She's tired, Ben. We're both old, but she's at peace. We both are. We got justice for Thomas and Rachel. We built a good life together, raised your father right. That's more than most people get." From the bedroom, a soft voice called, "Caleb, is Ben still there?" Caleb stood, moving toward the doorway. "Yes, love. We're just talking." Claire appeared, wrapped in a shawl, her hair white as the snow outside, but her blue eyes still bright. She smiled at Ben. "Did he tell you the scary parts, or just the heroic ones?" "Both, Grandma." She moved to sit beside Caleb, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders with the easy comfort of 30 years of marriage. "The scary parts are important," she said. They remind you that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Ben looked at them, this old couple who had fought a judge, survived a blizzard, brought down a murderer, and built a life from the ashes of tragedy. Will you tell me more stories? About the ranch, about the crow, about another night, Caleb said gently. It's late, and your parents will wonder where you are. As Ben stood to leave, Caleb called him back. One more thing, son. Remember what I told you. Winter always comes. It's harsh, and it's cruel, and sometimes it seems like it'll last forever. He looked at Claire, and she smiled back at him. But winter always ends. Spring always comes. You just have to survive long enough to see it. Ben nodded, understanding more than Caleb had expected. Thank you, Grandpa, for the story, for everything. After the boy left, Caleb and Claire sat together in the quiet cabin, watching the embers glow. Do you think he understood? Claire asked. Some of it. The rest. He'll understand when he's older, when life teaches him what words can't. Claire leaned her head against his shoulder. We did good, didn't we? With the life we built? We did more than good, love. We did justice, and we loved well. That's all anyone can ask. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the memory of that long-ago winter. But inside, warmed by fire and love, and the knowledge of a life well lived, Caleb and Claire Stone sat in peace, two souls who had found each other in the darkest of times and built a light that would endure long after they were gone.